Right, joining us for more on the latest development in the Ukraine-Russia war and other international relations stories is SABC international news editor Sophie Mokoena. Good afternoon, Sophie. Quite a lot taking place on the international front. Let's start with South Africa filing the memorial in the genocide case against Israel. Today is, of course, the deadline, but there are time differences. Is SA ready to file?
Well, SA is ready to file, as we heard the minister talking about that. And I think this is the moment that many have been waiting for, because South Africa made it clear then in January this year when they filed those documents or made a statement or presentation before the International Criminal Court that those were interim measures. But they will come back to make a proper presentation to prove or to give evidence and supporting documents in relation to allegations that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And therefore, this is the moment. And I spoke to the Minister of International Relations, Minister Lamola, immediately thereafter, just to check at that moment whether they have already filed. And this is what he had to say, but also talking about the issue that has become an elephant in the room in relation to cabinet, which is the tension between the DA and particular certain officials and members of cabinet on issues of foreign policy. Let's take a listen, the minister, on this issue of the ICJ, but also on setting the record straight, who is responsible to communicate foreign relations and agreements.
It will be done before close of business today, and once it's done, we will make the announcement. As I've said, it does detail in forensic and comprehensive detail and evidence that proves that indeed the state of Israel is committing genocide in Gaza.
And finally, Minister, there seems to be tension around the foreign policy. The DA making announcement even before the presidency has processed all the diplomatic processes in relation to international agreement. How are you going to resolve this confusion around the foreign policy? Who's who in the zoo?
Yeah, there is no question that the executive authority of the state is vested with the president, including he's the supreme diplomat of the country, the custodian of our foreign policy. We also facilitate and coordinate in terms of the Foreign Service Act. It's the DERCO that coordinates and handle all issues related to our foreign policy. So our colleagues should not jump the gun. They should allow the processes to be concluded, and once concluded, is then that announcements are made through the proper channels that are established in the state. But I think that with time, that will be understood by everyone.
We are told that during the negotiations leading to the agreement on the government of national unity, the issue of foreign policy was it was not an issue. There was no interest in unpacking how the foreign policy can be reviewed. And many are saying that the interest in relation to the DA was mostly the economic cluster. And therefore, that is why the government, in relation to ANC members in the cabinet, they feel that there is no movement, there's not going to be a movement in relation to the foreign policy. And also, you must remember the issue of elections in relation to political parties. DA will be going to a conference. And therefore, what I do know is that I've spoken to many people who have contact with the DA, is that there's a different view in terms of how the foreign policy must be implemented within the DA. In other words, there's a division. And therefore, the current members of the cabinet of the DA now has to gain the lost ground in terms of ensuring that they are in sync with the interest of the party. And therefore, you'll constantly find this division. Let's take a listen at what the leader of the DA earlier today, what he had to say when our colleagues in the Eastern Cape asked him about this issue of the foreign policy and mixed reactions, and perhaps the DA trying to make its voice heard in terms of where they are not in agreement with the current government. But as I pointed out, we are told that this was not an issue when the negotiations were started. Of interest for the DA was always an economic cluster. Let's take a listen at what he had to say.
I didn't tweet about the trip to Russia. We're a part of BRICS and we must leverage our opportunities within BRICS. What I objected to was the fawning over, on behalf of the government of South Africa, of which I'm a member, over Vladimir Putin. I don't think that's helpful. We agreed that we would be non-aligned in our approach to international affairs as the government of national unity. And I don't think it's fair that parties to the government are not included in foreign policy decisions that are being made. We agreed in the beginning that there would be no sealed mandates within departments, and I don't think it is right that the ANC conduct their foreign policy as if they have a 50% plus one majority. They don't. They're part of a coalition, and I think greater care needs to be made in terms of determining the 7th administration's approach to foreign relations, and I think it needs to include all partners to the GNU, not just one.
Why are you not in Russia? Why are you not in New York with the delegation?
Because I'm here for the medium-term budget policy statement, and I have a lot of work to do on the ground here. I will be joining them virtually this afternoon, but I've been invited to make a presentation. So I will be in New York, just not personally. I'll be there on...
Are you maybe hoping to meet the president to honor your differences?
Well, I'm sure we'll meet. I mean, these things are not catastrophes. And I've no doubt that we're in still the settling in phase. The government's only 4 months old, and there's a lot of settling in that needs to happen. This is not the only issue. There's some others, as you're aware of, NHR, Bella, and now this issue. And I've no doubt we'll, with maturity and with focus and dedication, find ways through these issues. I don't think it's unusual. It happens with coalition governments around the world. We have a very large coalition in South Africa, and to expect all 10 parties to get on and agree about everything is simply not, it's not possible. So there will be differences from time to time.
Quite an interesting take there. It seems where everybody has said perhaps cracks are starting to form in the GNU. When listening to John Steenhuisen, he seems to reduce this to just teething problems that perhaps even more disagreements will come with, again, the Bella Bill and the NHI. But, Sophie, the big question is what could have possibly prompted the Democratic Alliance, though, on a number of other issues that we've seen specifically on social media, where we now even saw the presidency spokesperson, Vincent Mokoena, having to almost address some of these matters that were placed in the social media space. What do you think could have prompted just this decision to have some of those matters addressed there, or even perhaps what they would consider great moments for the Democratic Alliance being announced specifically there this time?
Trying to take your supporters, your voters, those who invested in your party on board, including business that invested on the Democratic Alliance, so that they know that issues that they have reservations on, you will be able to speak out. And therefore, you know that there's always a thin issue of Russia. But here is the catch. He is saying, we are part of the BRICS. We have to leverage on BRICS and opportunities within the BRICS. Who started BRICS? Who started BRICS? Before it even becomes BRICS, it was BRIC. Maybe institutional memory is quite important. Russia has been there, and you cannot avoid Russia. Russia is the member of the G20. The leaders of the G20, who are the leaders of the G20, are mostly your G7, the developed North. So I think there also DA has to familiarize itself with global issues, that a country is represented by its head of state. As long as he's the head of state of Russia, and Russia is part of G20 and BRICS, you will always have to interact with President Putin. The same way he was able to extend his hand and shake hands with the president of China, Xi Jinping. And therefore, these are international issues, and this is diplomacy. And I think because you have people within the DA or supporters of the DA, the conservative, who are not happy about an individual, you have this problem.
But I suppose the context that you gave, that there is an upcoming conference, so whomever might perhaps win and become the leader of the Democratic Alliance must be seen to constantly affirm the ideals of the Democratic Alliance if they are a deployee in government. But just finally, 8 days before Americans head to the polls, we understand that it's a very tight race. Are there any commentators who hold a different view, who can perhaps see a clear winner?
It's a tight race. We are told, in fact, we heard today that it's a very, very tight race. It's not clear who is going to win this one, but I think the world is watching, and if it's Trump, it will be a different scenario. If it is Harris, it will also be a different scenario, particularly when you look at the war in Ukraine and Middle East.
All right, Sophie, as always, thank you very much for joining us and giving us that reportage. That's SABC International News Editor Sophie Mokoena. They're just giving us the very latest on the international front.